In 2009, I was, like many of you, a working professional. I worked in international development for about 13 years. And then in December 2009, it all went a little bit wrong. I was pregnant and I got very, very ill. I developed preeclampsia. And then that turned into something called HELP syndrome, which is a life-threatening pregnancy condition. I had fevers, night sweats, I felt really sick, and I eventually developed a really crushing back pain. And I spent 3.5 weeks in the hospital where they investigated me for all sorts of tropical diseases because I'd spent a lot of time in Sierra Leone and places where you pick up tropical diseases. And what they eventually discovered was that I had stage 4 diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. And if you don't know what diffuse large B-cell lymphoma is, because I didn't, it's a very aggressive form of blood cancer. I spent 5 months in the hospital receiving chemotherapy treatment, and they told me that if the cancer didn't kill me, if the chemo didn't kill me, my chances of survival were 40% over 5 years. So about a year after that happened, just because bad luck really does come in threes, I got meningitis. I know, right? Yeah, really sad. So I spent another month in hospital, 4 months recovering from meningitis because it had really badly affected my brain. And it turned out that I got meningitis because my immune system had been damaged by the chemotherapy. So as a result, I now get monthly immunoglobulin infusions, which are they're a blood product. So they take about 4 hours. I go to the hospital every month. They don't make me feel great, but they're vastly preferable to getting meningitis again. So I have a lot of complex medical conditions. But what I wanted to talk about was how my experience of the health service and my work in international development have kind of influenced my thinking on what it means to be a patient. And one of the questions I had in my mind was, can development teach us anything about healthcare in the UK? So if you'll just bear with me for a second, I wanted to give you an example of a project that I worked on in Vietnam about 12 years ago. And I worked with a community of boat dwellers in central Vietnam. They're called the Sampagnes. They live on boats. They're highly marginalized. And I worked with an organization that was working with the local government to distribute funds to the Sampagnes. And what we discovered through our monitoring processes is that although the project had been set up so that the people who lived on boats would use the money for small businesses, what they were really using the money for were televisions and motorcycles. Which I couldn't really blame them for, because who doesn't want a TV or a motorbike? But it wasn't really creating long-term change for anybody. Boxes were being ticked because the money was being spent, but poverty wasn't being reduced. People's lives ultimately weren't better in the long term. So what we did was we went in and started working with the government and saying, right, how can you actually work with these people? Because to be honest with them, they didn't really know anything about the people who lived on boats and what their priorities were. The people on boats didn't really understand what kind of businesses they were supposed to be developing with the money that they were being given. So we worked with them to develop a system where they could work together and design new outcomes. And one of the things that they did was actually pool their resources, so they created a floating health clinic, which was something that nobody had ever thought was even possible. The government ended up buying into it. It was funded. They had government doctors working on that. So I think in development, certainly what we found is that failed projects often lack an adequate understanding of the priorities of the beneficiaries, and communities often aren't trained in how to change, but neither are the government officials that are supposed to be working with them. This is really an example of what we call in health co-production. But I think what we see very often is that health services often reflect the priorities of the provider and not the patient. And I wanted to give you a couple of examples of how I've sort of come across this in the last couple of years, even though people-powered health and patient experience and patient engagement have really come to the forefront. I think very often as a patient, you can feel like you're a square peg that is being jammed into a round hole. You have to access the services that are available, whether they meet your needs or not. And I mentioned I have to go to an immunology clinic once a month. And a few months ago, I went there, and they have a late clinic on a Wednesday. By late, I mean it starts at 4 o'clock, it ends at 8. So not really late. You still have to leave work early, but it is helpful. And I got there, and they said, well, we're not having the clinics on a Wednesday anymore. We're going to have them on a Tuesday or a Thursday, because the doctor can't do a Wednesday. There always has to be a doctor on call. So they did a survey of all of the patients who attend the clinic, and all of us, there are about 20 of us that attend this on a regular basis, said, well, we would like it to be on a Tuesday. So I redid all of my appointments for the next 6 months so that I could attend on a Tuesday. And that's not just me. That's me, my husband, my mother-in-law, my daughter's nursery providers, everybody around me who helps me go there on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. I came back the next month, and they said, actually, we're not having the clinics on a Tuesday. We're going to have them on a Thursday. And I said, oh, that's really interesting, because all of the patients wanted it on a Tuesday. And they said, yeah, well, the doctor doesn't want to work on a Tuesday night. I then had this really interesting conversation with the nurse where I said, why is it that you hold these late clinics? And they said, well, we hold them for the patients. And so I said, okay, so now you're holding the clinic on a Thursday night for the patients, but none of the patients are going to attend. And she said, yeah, that is a problem. So there was a lot of back and forth, and eventually, I am pleased to say, they are now being held on a Tuesday. But when we talk about patient engagement and patient involvement, is it really meaningful? Very often as a patient, I tend to feel that we get asked questions, but people don't really want to know what the answers are. I'm a trustee of a charity called Shine Cancer Support, and we work with young adults with cancer. And I think this kind of thing tends to happen a lot with younger adults with cancer because we don't fit a model of what the cancer patient looks like. And one of the things that we recently found in a survey that we did was that almost 50% of people that we surveyed didn't feel that they were adequately supported to preserve their fertility before they went for cancer treatment. And we know that one of the reasons this happens is that there are different priorities between the clinicians and the patients. The doctors really want to save the patients' lives. And of course, that has to be a priority. But the patients also want to have a life if their life is saved. What was their life supposed to look like? If they wanted to have children and they're not given any kind of choice in that process, it's really difficult. So doctors and patients very often have different priorities when cancer is diagnosed, but they don't tend to talk to each other about it. And fertility, I think, is one of those issues that doctors can be quite shy about, patients are shy about, and so in the end, the outcome isn't something that anybody really wants. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I think we have a lot of problems, but patients would like to be part of the solution. It's quite a heavy burden to walk around thinking that you have long-term conditions and you are a drain on society. So engage us and make us part of the solution. Yeah, and I think most patients would really welcome the opportunity to do that. So thank you very much. I will leave it there.